For today's episode of Children of Heroes, we headed about 2.5 hours south from central London to Eastbourne, where we met with Bernard Zdeněk Duncan, son of Major Rudolf Drbohlav.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father served for the Czechoslovak military intelligence in the United Kingdom during the Second World War. Could you tell us more about how he joined the army in the first place?
He volunteered for the Czech army, and he was at a military academy and trained there, and was a Czech officer. First of all, when the Germans came into Czechoslovakia, people of his ilk escaped, and they went over to Warsaw and into Poland and was part of a group there. And then I understand he went to join the French Foreign Legion. This is a group of Czech army officers in a camp near Paris who were all going to join the French Foreign Legion, and my father's in that. He served in Algeria because my mother tells me that he wasn't used to the desert and walking in the desert and all this kind of business, and that he got major blisters out there. And then he ended up in London then as part of military intelligence, because that's what he did before the war. And he was part of an army group in London.
What did he do in London during the war?
I was contacted in the year 2000 by somebody called Omar Bartos, and he came from Chicago. He was a Czech cousin that I didn't know existed. He was very interested in military history and his family's military history in the Second World War. So he had come to Prague to look at the military records of his family. And he said to me that he'd gone through all the files, and there were all the quite thin files. He came to my father's file, which was a huge chunk. So he decided he wanted to contact me. He said within those records, my father had married a Catherine Crean from Ireland, and a son, Zdeněk, was born. So he, by email, contacted as many Creans as he could find in Ireland to see if any of them knew of a Catherine Crean who married a Czech officer. And one of them then wrote to my uncle, my mother's brother, in London, and said, "Does Bernard want to be involved in this at all?" And I said, "Oh, yes, please," because I was now, 55, so I was very keen. And so Omar contacted me, and from that, he came over to Prague with his wife, Ramona. So I was then introduced to Prague, and he's so keen on military history, he took me all around Prague. At the same time, he was telling me about my father's involvement in London, and he introduced me to a Major General Curzak. I've got his obituary here. And it seems that they shared digs around the corner in Marble Arch. And he introduced my mother to my father. He was going out with a doctor, and they wanted to go out on a double date, and the doctor found my mother. So this is my mother and father's wedding photo in 1943. But in that discussion, of course, I found out that my father was in military intelligence, indeed, that he was part of training group, and he was involved in training the people that were sent over in Anthropoid and that kind of stuff. He was trained in that kind of warfare and was up in Scotland. Subsequently, I found in Arisaig, in that area there, and his name is on the memorial. So that's where I learnt a lot more about what he did in the war. After the war, I was born in 1945, so after the war, we went back to Prague. That's where my parents stayed in Prague, and we lived in Prague until the communists took over in 1948. And my father then, because he'd been in military intelligence with the English and Americans, was considered politically unreliable. So he was dismissed from his position. My mother had very bad memories of being in Prague at that time. I think she didn't speak Czech, she was Irish. She talks of a time of rationing and talks of a time when it was a difficult life there, and then the tensions involved with the communist takeover. I think that's my Czech grandmother, so that must be taken in Czechoslovakia. So that must be 48, I would say, that one. The thing that brought this all to a head was when Jan Masaryk fell out of a window, and my father said to my mother, "It's time to leave the country." And so we had British passports, so we were able to leave. My mother left with everything in a suitcase. She always regrets she left her wedding presents behind, all that kind of stuff. We just came out in what we could carry. And my father then lost his job and he escaped over the border to Germany. He ended up with the American intelligence services in Germany and based in Regensburg. And we must have gone back briefly to there because I have a vague memory, so that probably was in 1949 somehow. I remember being in a military camp, you know, with armed guards, and I remember my father had a gun under his pillow, and you know, that kind of atmosphere there. I wasn't there long. This must be taken with my mother and myself, probably around 1949, I would say, in Germany. My mother subsequently said my father was involved in debriefing people who defected and also taking people over the border into what is now the Czech Republic. We came to live in England and we lived in North London, and my father continued to live in Germany, and he very periodically came home. I don't remember him coming home, in fact, but my mother says he came home. She never knew when he would come, that he always came a different way home so that nobody could follow him. She received money from him. Somebody would turn up with an envelope full of money, and that's how she lived over there. This is my mother and father. This would have been shortly after the war, and they were in, I think that's Hampstead Heath. They used to like to going to Hampstead Heath a lot. I lived in an atmosphere where I was not meant to talk about my father, not to know anything. And if anybody pulled up outside our house, my mother always got a bit jittery. And again, subsequently, I learned from her that she was always worried that I'd be kidnapped to put pressure on him. And then my father, unfortunately, got cancer. And he had a melanoma in his leg. And he didn't want it amputated, which is what they were recommending. So he basically came home to die. In Regensburg, he had a code name, Ralph. That's my mother told me. And he was an export, I think it was, or something. He had a whole cover for what he was over there. We had some Czech friends, or very few Czech friends. My mother tried to keep my Czech going, as it were, sent me to a Czech Saturday school. I didn't like doing that at all. I didn't know any Czech speakers. Then in 1955, she changed our name from Drbohlav to Duncan. In fact, she wanted Durban, but the solicitor muddled up the depot. So we ended up with Duncan, a Scottish name, but never mind, there we are. And that's as much as I really knew about my father until in 2000 when Omar contacted me. He took me to my village where I was brought up, Salakohovalota, I think that's how you pronounce it. And I was introduced there to the mayor, and there was a reception for us there. And they took the opportunity, they had a new village seal, and I've got a picture of myself unveiling the village seal. I've got a newspaper article from us in the local paper about our visit and how we were discovered through the internet. I met people who knew my father. That's a man who was crying when he spoke to me. He said, "I wanted to shake the hand of the son of Rudolf." I got presented that with a picture of my grandmother's cottage that had been knocked down. And that picture is on the wall just there. And I met a lady, I've got a photo, who was a cousin of Omar's, who danced with my father in a garden in the village, a particular place. So it was very, very, very interesting. I also met a local historian called Karol Kratny, and he gave me his book on local, it was mainly about Air Force pilots. And I realized that the Holaceks were in there, and first time I realized that they were actually part of my father's background, and they had known each other before the war. And I didn't realize that before then. That was a real eye-opener. We went to see my grandmother's grave, kind of filled in on that kind of history. It was very good to do that. I found out my grandmother had been in a work camp when the Germans, particularly again to put pressure, she wouldn't denounce her son. And then when the communists took over, she was in another work camp. So she seemed to have had a very sad life. My father was an only son. He was born on the border between Czechoslovakia and Germany. His father was a German soldier in the First World War and died then in the First World War. So it's amazing how things go round in a circle.
You have worked mainly in the pharmaceutical sector?
I have, yes.
Why did you choose this field?
I did a pharmacy degree, so I did science degrees at A-level. I went to school in Ealing and in North London, or West London I should say. So with those I decided to do pharmacy, mainly because I had a job at the end of it. I got a pharmacy degree, went to work for the Boots Company, and I was in small stores as a pharmacist there, and then moved to larger stores, did retail management training, and then managed larger stores. So I managed a few stores around the southeast. We were in Canterbury, and then my mother passed away in 1991. She was 77, and I took the opportunity then to move to here, to Eastbourne, to a larger store here. And that was my life here. And I married in 1969. We had 3 children, Mark, Catherine and Marina, and we've got 6 grandchildren. Unfortunately, Diana passed away in 2004 with motor neurone disease. So I retired a bit early to mind her for a year. And then I went back to work as a locum pharmacist. I went back to my roots then, into small pharmacies, did locum work. And then very shortly after that, in 2005, I was contacted by the village, Sarakov, to come and unveil a memorial to my father and another, what they would call Czech hero from their village. So I went over there with my family, my son and 2 daughters and 2 grandchildren. And that was a very moving experience for everybody. And I met the mayor there again and the person that created the little monument. The mayor gave a speech there as well. It was very exciting to do that. In 2020, I think the year is, we went to the embassy to get a medal, posthumous medal for my father. And I've got that as well. That was another occasion I took my grandchildren along to that. So I've had a whole kind of sudden dipping into Czech language, Czech background and Czech culture, as it were. And that Czech heritage really has been sharpened up by my sudden awareness of what my father was involved in and how difficult it must have been for my mother at that time, and how brave she was and stoic. And I subsequently found out that when my father died, he died in our house in Hendon, she had a miscarriage, and I didn't know as a child. She hid it from me. You know, so and I would have had a sister. So I think she had a difficult life. And when I look back, I suppose as a child you just take everything for granted. You just get on with your own life, and you don't really think how much my mother, she never married again. And what a hard life she had, really.
I think that this Czech origin had a strong influence on your life.
I do. It's always been in the background. I've always felt, I feel British because I've been brought up here. In fact, it's been a good country in many ways for somebody like my mother and myself to be able to come to a country like this, be assimilated and have a life here. So I think that's good. But I've always, anything comes up where the Czech Republic is mentioned, I always pay attention to it. So you watch the football or anything that's going on in any kind of sports thing. Wimbledon, all the Czechs, with Navratilova, because she loves coming to Eastbourne to see the Czech tennis players come through. You've got a kind of feeling about them as well.